The last 25 years have brought tremendous changes to rail operations across Australia. Trains are of a length and weight once barely imagined, and crew conditions have improved immeasurably. But at the same time, something has been lost. Polished brass has been replaced by aluminium, varnished wood by vinyl, and while we can now get just about anywhere faster than we ever could, it is often in less comfort and invariably with less style. The steam age encompassed a different way of life. Work on the railways was tough, but it brought with it a great sense of pride and achievement. For well over 100 years, the sight, sound and smell of steam were an integral part of the Australian character. Steam was phased out in Australia over a long period, beginning in earnest in the 1950s, finally succumbing in New South Wales in early 1973. Throughout the last decade, selected examples of most surviving classes were retained for preservation, and societies were formed across the country to ensure that this vital part of our heritage not be allowed to disappear. With this in mind, 62 enthusiasts formed the New South Wales Rail Transport Museum in 1962, and one of their first exhibits was the powerful 482 5711. Withdrawn in 1963, the 57 is the last survivor of 38 three-cylinder giants of the 57 and 58 class known simply to railwaymen as the big engines. The first 57 appeared in 1929, and the 58s followed from 1950. They were built primarily to eliminate double heading of smaller locos and did much of their work dragging the heavy trains up the tortuous grades of the Blue Mountains west of Sydney. But even with a tractive effort of 56,000 pounds, the climb out of Lithgow Valley still required the assistance of no less than 3 standard goods locos, 2 on the front and 1 on the back. Electrification of the mountains in 1957 spelled the end for the big engines, but a few continued to work south from Goulburn, and thankfully a small group had the foresight to save 5711, and the RTM was on its way to amassing a magnificent collection of locomotives, now resident at Thirlmere, south of Sydney. As steam began to disappear, a number of enthusiast groups took advantage of locos still in service by organising some spectacular tours, preserving at least their image on film. In 1968, for example, with 3803's withdrawal imminent, the last chance was taken to run double-headed streamlined 38s to Broadmeadow, where the equally mouth-watering combination of 3501 and 3531 took over, paralleling a 60-class Garratt to Maitland. The running of tours continued after the end of steam, using locos retained in working order. But 1974 brought devastating news for enthusiasts in New South Wales. When newly appointed Commissioner Philip Shirley announced that steam would no longer be permitted to operate on government metals, a hastily organised last steam train was run over the Blue Mountains behind 3203, 3526 and 3820. Fortunately, most of Mr. Shirley's decisions proved to be equally ill-informed, and he retired 2 years before the end of his term. The steam ban was relaxed over the next few years. Today, there are not too many places that don't see the occasional visit by a steam-hauled train. In 1995, RTM engine 5910 took a run up through the Liverpool Ranges, recreating the wartime troop trains of 50 years earlier. The 20 members of the 59 class were built in the US by Baldwin in the 1950s. Originally oil burners, the majority were converted to coal in the early 60s, and they saw service throughout most of New South Wales. In the final years, they were often to be found on the pickup goods between Gosford and Broadmeadow. '5910 was withdrawn in December 1972, the last of its class in regular service, and has remained in running condition virtually ever since. 23 years later, at Muswellbrook, the opportunity is taken to have a look up at the business end. At Aberdeen, a stop is made to oil around the loco and make sure that everything is in order for the difficult climb over the Liverpool Range. As the train climbs towards the Ardglen Tunnel, a few inquisitive locals can't resist a closer look. On the other side of the hill, a pair of 82 class work into the Ardglen Refuge, leaving the main clear for the 59 to continue its journey north. Keeping a steam locomotive running requires dedicated effort and very specific skills. Restoring a loco that hasn't turned a wheel for decades is another story again. In 1989, Queensland Railway's A10 number 6 was removed from Redbank Railway Museum to begin a new chapter in what has been a remarkably long and rather charmed life. Earlier in the year, the suggestion to restore the tiny 042 to working order had been put forward by a group of members of the Australian Railway Historical Society. And following a feasibility study, the project was given the go-ahead. When number 6 was put into Redbank in 1969, it was the oldest working locomotive in Australia and one of the oldest in the world, having been built by Nielsen's of Glasgow in 1865. Its survival was the result of being purchased by Binger, a sugar mill, Bundaberg, in 1896, where it worked until the mid-1950s when it was retired, pending scrapping. Fortunately, the mill management had a change of heart and the historic little loco was overhauled. The A10 was presented back to Queensland Railways in 1965 and ran special trains until 1969. Bundaberg Foundry had provided a new boiler in 1955, and 35 years later the boiler was still in reasonable condition, the only major work required being retubing and the replacement of the crown staves. The restoration, by volunteers, was completed in the old steam erecting shed at Main in only 18 months. A steam test was successfully carried out in May 1991, and a load test hauling 2 DH-class diesels was run out to Corinda on the 24th of that month. A few days later, a recommissioning tour was run from Roma Street to Corinda, paralleling fellow QR heritage loco PB15, number 732. Driver Ivan Jorgensen operated the A10 in the late 60s and is obviously pleased to be back at the regulator 30 years later, although his retirement in a few weeks' time may be contributing to his smile. In mid-June, number 6 headed north to Cairns, where it took part in the centenary celebrations for the Corinda line in one of the most scenically spectacular parts of the country. The little engine looked magnificent as it crossed the famous Stony Creek Bridge. The A10 shared the duties with PB15, 732, which also put in some fine performances. Number 6 ran at Kuranda for nearly 3 months and is a credit to the volunteers who gave the historic little engine a new lease of life. At the other end of the motive power spectrum is Queensland Railway's heritage locomotive Garratt 1009. At a little over 6 times the weight of the A10, 1009, built in 1950, represents the final stages of steam locomotive development. Weighing in at 137 tonnes, the Garratt is a heavy engine for 3'6" gauge, but its weight is spread over 14 axles, allowing it to traverse most lines in the state. With a tractive effort of over 32,000 pounds, it's an ideal tour engine and is used extensively by its custodians. Although a number of Australian Garratts are preserved, 1009 is the only one currently in working order. The future looks good for steam in Queensland, with many locos in running condition and a number of restorations nearing completion. But perhaps the most surprising home for ex-QR engines was found south of the border, at the Lithgow Zigzag Railway. AC16, number 218A, is currently undergoing restoration here. Also resident are 2 DD17s, a C17 and a BB 18 1/4, as well as a South Australian 400 class Garratt. Today, the BB 1072 is doing the honours. 132 kilometres west of Sydney, the zigzag was completed in 1869 as a means of getting trains down the western escarpment of the Blue Mountains. It was the brainchild of engineer John Whitten, and the magnificent stone viaducts still stand as a testament to his ingenuity, carrying trains through 3 changes of direction between the top road and bottom points. Ultimately, the drilling of the famous 10 tunnels saw the zigzag bypassed in 1910. It was not until 1975, following the formation of the Zigzag Railway Cooperative Society, that Whitten's masterpiece once again felt the rumble of flanged wheels. Today the railway runs all the way up to Clarence and is enormously popular with both enthusiasts and tourists. While steam is often seen as the major drawcard, rail preservation extends beyond just locomotives. The magnificently restored parlour car, Yarra, once provided a bit of luxury for travellers on Victorian railways. With its plush seats, pressed ceilings and stained glass, it's a reminder of an era, not just of opulence, but of skilled construction and superb taste in design. Built by Newport Workshops in 1906, Easter 1997 found Yarra on display at Yarrawonga, while J-Class 515 ran special trips. Victorian enthusiasts are treated to plenty of mainline action. D3 639 and R 766 roar through Harcourt, heading for Bendigo. Both locos, along with several others, are maintained and operated by Steam Rail Victoria, a non-profit organisation based at the historic Newport Railway Workshops. The D3 was, for many years, the Commissioner's engine and returned to service in early 1997. It looks just about perfect in immaculate unlined black as it prepares to leave Bendigo. a brief renumbering ceremony proving to be something of an anticlimax. While being serviced in Bendigo Roundhouse, the loco has undergone a change of identity to D3658. This, in fact, is historically correct, the original 639 having been withdrawn in 1956, at which time 658 took on its role and number. It actually only ran as 639 in regular service for about 8 years, spending more than 20 as 658. R766 was restored in 1985 as part of a project initiated by a private consortium, the Melbourne Limited. Developed by Michael Muter, the original concept was launched in New South Wales in 1975, when Phil Belbin was commissioned to paint a scene depicting what was then to be called the Hunter Valley Limited, Australia's first mainline tourist train. .3237, set aside at Enfield, was chosen as motive power. However, departmental policy was inflexible, and the idea was taken to Victoria, Michael Muter providing the submission artwork. In early 1980, Premier Dick Hamer finally approved the project, which was to be privately funded at a cost of $1.3 million. R766 was chosen to haul the luxury train, and Spotswood Depot would be the restoration base.
I'll take a couple of variations in this line.
Carriages were purchased from South Australian Railways, close inspection revealing how much work would be involved in refurbishment. This was, however, to be a luxury train, finished to the highest standards. There would be no shortcuts, so most of the sheet metal was simply replaced, each carriage completely gutted and grit blasted before rebuilding commenced. As the rolling stock began to take shape, work was also progressing on R766, most importantly the boiler, seen here with the large tubes removed. A major boiler problem has the potential to scuttle a restoration project, but fortunately 766s proved to be in basically good condition. With new large tubes fitted, the small tubes were rebeaded to ensure steam tightness. While the loco trailing truck assembly was sandblasted, the wheels were reprofiled on the wheel lathe. The driving wheels, however, required considerably more attention, so the wheel sets were taken to Cockatoo Island Dockyard in Sydney, where the axles were painstakingly jacked out of the wheels to enable replacement of the main roller bearings. The original bearings will be heated until they expand enough to simply drop off, allowing the new bearings to be fitted. As an indication of the enormous costs involved in a project of this type, each of these bearings, and there are 6, cost just over $6,000. A fascinating process is used in refitting the wheels to the axles. A specially made gas ring heats the wheel's centre, causing it to expand slightly, while at the same time, the axle end is lowered into a bath of liquid nitrogen where it will contract. Once reunited, the two will contract and expand respectively and ensure an absolutely solid fit. Back at Spotswood, the R-class boiler is undergoing a hydrostatic test with K190 providing the necessary warm water, which is much easier on the boiler. It's hard to imagine too many people rushing to volunteer for this job. By late 1994, the rolling stock was nearing completion with fitting out and painting underway. Finally, a beautifully restored carriage, resplendent in new paintwork, is shunted into Bendigo railway workshops. The lagging is fitted to 766, and in a short time, those who worked so hard will find out if it's been worth all the effort. Both loco and train look magnificent, as the Melbourne Limited ran trials to Bendigo in early 1985. By June 1985, patrons were enjoying the nostalgia of luxury travel, and the future looked promising. However, after an operating life of only 12 months, problems began to surface between management and unions, combining with unrealistic costs for running over government metals, and ultimately the project failed. Regardless of the reasons though, at least another R class was back in steam. R766 joined 761, which had been restored in 1984 as part of Steamrail's fleet. Both locos, along with R707, are currently taking part in an innovative project being trialled by V-Line, which sees steam back on the front of a regular passenger train from Melbourne to Geelong during school holidays. It's an operation that has required considerable planning, and extensive crew training has been carried out, usually in the company of an N-class diesel on the regular 3:55 p.m. from Melbourne to Bendigo. R-Class put in some spirited performances, and 707 is flying as it passes Karlsruhe. To hear the arrival of a passenger train announced as a steam loco hisses to a stop is a remarkable thing in the 1990s. After the 158-kilometre run from Melbourne, the engine will be serviced and turned before returning to the state capital later that night. As exciting as it is to see steam back on a regular passenger service, the run back to Melbourne has also proved to be quite a spectacle, with the R-Class joining 3 diesels, N, A and X-Class, on a 3,200-tonne goods train. The Geelong Passenger gives the locos a chance to really stretch their legs and is proving very popular. The R-Class was, without a doubt, the premier Victorian express locomotive. In New South Wales, it was the 38. When 3801 was returned to service in 1986, it had been 10 years since any of the class had turned a wheel in steam. The class leader has always been a popular tour engine, and it seemed ironic that it should be one of the first 38s withdrawn, being originally set aside in December 1962. Just prior to this, a supposed last run went north, with 5901 assisting to Hornsby. The 59 had, at the time, just become the first of its class to be converted to coal firing, carrying a C on the buffer beam, and followed the Tour light engine to take up allotment at Broadmeadow. A brief patch of sun at Mount Ku-ring-gai finds 01 heading to Newcastle. Fortunately, in July '63, the streamliner was put back into service and returned to green livery. The famous speed run of 1964, non-stop to Newcastle, in a record 2 hours, 1.5 minutes. A major overhaul in 1966, partly funded by the RTM, saw the loco continue in service until late '67, when it was withdrawn to become a restricted traffic engine. It continued in this role until 1976, when it went on static display with the RTM at Thirlmere. In the early 80s, 3801 Limited was formed by State Rail Chief David Hill to investigate the possibility of restoring the 38 to working order. And in 1983, the loco was towed to Newcastle, where the mammoth task was to begin. By sheer good fortune, the newly formed Hunter Valley Training Company was searching for a project to boost the morale of their out-of-trade apprentices. And what better than a famous express locomotive, long associated with Newcastle. It was a restoration that required initiative, skill and hard work. New techniques were developed and old skills were rediscovered. In November 1986, steam was raised for the first time in a decade, and on the 15th of that month, 3801 was recommissioned. 3801 is now almost certainly our most famous steam locomotive. Today, the first of the 38s is housed and maintained in the old, large erecting shops at Everley. At the other end of the shed, the last of the class has been undergoing a remarkable transformation. 3830 was well utilised as a tour engine in the 1960s, having been painted green for the inaugural standard gauge Spirit of Progress in 1961. Seen here on the Southern Highlands Express at Cabramatta, the engine emerged from a minor overhaul in 1966 in an alternative livery with green smokebox. In August of that year, 30 made a spectacular speed run to Newcastle, and in November took part in a tour to bring newly overhauled 3801 back to Sydney, doubling with 3820 from Chatswood on the North Shore line. However, all good things come to an end, and 30's boiler certificate was due to expire at the end of October 67, so the RTM arranged a farewell tour to Wyong, which was an immediate sellout. And so, on the 22nd of October 1967, 3830 hauled its last passengers. No one could have known then that exactly 30 years later to the day, this magnificent locomotive would be simmering quietly, glistening in new paint as it was recommissioned outside Sydney's Powerhouse Museum. This was the culmination of a 5-year restoration, a joint undertaking of the museum and 3801 Limited. Back in 1992, the loco was barely recognisable as it was dragged out of the asbestos removal plant, having had its lagging removed. As it was towed to Everley, it was hard to believe that 3830 would ever run again. But at least now things were moving in a positive direction. It was early 97 before all the bits and pieces began to, once again, resemble a 38. The running gear was virtually complete, and outside, the boiler, which had been restored by the Hunter Valley Training Company, was undergoing a hydrostatic test. With the boiler inspector satisfied, reassembly commenced. The superheater header was back on, and its tubes were refitted. A few weeks later, the boiler was ready for refitting. There are not too many places where a 38 boiler can be swung around like this, and it would be a tragedy if this facility was lost. With the boiler back on, there was a definite light at the end of the tunnel, and the time was approaching when 3830 would again feel the heat of a roaring fire. By mid-September, the 38 was ready for its steam test. With a bed of coal laid on, scrap timber is used to get things going. This will be ignited using sawdust, which arrives in the traditional buckets in a wheelbarrow.
Stay there, Frank. Hold the shooter. paper over the door.
You've been watching, what was that?
Okay, and just drop him down on top of everything else.
Just scatter it round gently, right, from side to side. Let me get going first. Right, now just scatter him round gently wherever there is other kiro and bits of stuff.
It's going to look like on his hand. Beautiful, it's going beautiful.
Righto. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ross.
First fire in 30 years.
Terrific. Very good.
Here we are. First fire in 30 years, mate.
You too, Don. Yeah, well, terrific.
Absolutely. Yeah, but
The steaming was a resounding success, and various minor adjustments were carried out. At the end of the day, the opportunity was taken to clean out the valves. In the early hours of the 19th of September, 30 ran trials around the Bankstown line, and on the 25th took an MFS carriage to Port Kembla, where it would be run in over 2 weekends on the Cockatoo Run tourist train to Moss Vale. On the 28th of September, 3830 met its stablemate, which had brought a tour down for the Bowral Tulip Festival. Once running-in trials were complete, repainting could take place. The results were spectacular. After recommissioning on October 22nd, a special train was run around the Bankstown line for all those involved in the restoration. .30's first official public run was on Saturday the 25th of October, when, after a ceremony for the Hunter Valley Training Company at East Greta, it double-headed with 3801 back to Sydney. This was the moment enthusiasts had been waiting for. A vast number of people deserve our gratitude for restoring this magnificent engine. But they must have received their greatest reward by seeing the pleasure brought to so many line-side spectators as 3830 made its triumphant return to the main line. As we approach the 21st century, it seems increasingly important to retain reminders of our past, and there are many exciting restoration projects underway all around the country. Anyone can get involved with preserving our heritage, and societies will always welcome volunteers. If we don't at least occasionally patronise some of the many tours now operating, we may find that our children will only see these priceless artefacts as static exhibits in museums, and no one with an interest in railways would want that. There is, surely, no way to put into words the thrill of witnessing a powerful locomotive thundering through a quiet station in the early hours. But, thanks to countless dedicated volunteers, we can still show our children just how exciting it really was.